So, good evening. Thank you and welcome. I'm Matt Harkins, and I'm here to briefly introduce our guest tonight, Spencer Reece. But before I forget, there are a couple quick points. One is to please remember something I forget, which is to turn off our devices, which is silence our devices. After tonight's reading, we'll have time for questions. There will also be books for sale, as well as a broadside created by Scott Murphy of our art department here at CSB SJU. This broadside was also printed in the Welly Book Art Studio. And Spencer will be delighted to sign both his books and the broadside. And I've heard that this is perhaps his first broadside. And so this is kind of a special moment for us too. That's the case, so I'm going to applaud for us. Also, there's another sort of unplanned announcement, which is that somebody noticed that there are a lot of English majors in here. And that this was an opportune time to beseech our English majors to RSVP for the English banquet. Lori sent you an email, it's lurking in your box, and it's ready and waiting for you. So when you go home tonight, go click on that and RSVP. But back to our main event, and this is Spencer Reece. Spencer is the author of 2 poetry collections, The Clerk's Tale and The Road to Emmaus. In 2017, he also published a book of poems written by the students he taught in a Honduran orphanage, titled Counting Time Like People Count Stars, Poems by the Girls of Little Roses, San Pedro Sula, Honduras. And last night in this very room, some of us saw the documentary made about Spencer and those students, titled Voices Beyond the Wall, 12 Love Poems from the Murder Capital of the World. Within many of Spencer's poems, a reader experiences a catalog of loss. Family collapses, houses foreclose, dogs must be given away. Lovers mistake each other, walk away into a kind of quiet devastation. Within this loss, though, is a reckoning of the unexpected beauty of what remains. In the poem Portofino, the speaker says, "Promise me you will witness the day diminish. And when the roofs darken, when the stars drift until they shatter on the sea's finish, you will know what I told you is true when I said abandonment is beautiful." In these poems, loss becomes a way of seeing, perhaps for the first time and perhaps in the truest sense, the nature and dimensions of the love that anchors us all. To name, to record what passes is a holy office of love. The speaker of the poem, in the poem 1220 in New York, offers a beautiful example, which I'm going to close with. We do not speak of poetry. Recently, books have begun to disappear. My brother, if I name the things disappearing from the world, how long can I keep them from doing so? At the Cafe Reggio, I study you, backlit with afternoon sunlight, the light intersected by taxis, golden retrievers on leashes, people walking with yellow rain slickers, messengers on bicycles with orange stripes, the masses in the city motivated by 100 forms of touch. If I once thought love had limits, I was wrong. Will you please join me in welcoming Spencer Reece?
I'm just gonna wait 1 second. I'll put this on. Is that good? Can you hear me? Is it working? Yeah? Okay. Thank you all for coming. I'm really overwhelmed with gratitude, and thank you so much for that introduction. Thank you for the class. Who else can I thank? Thank you for yesterday. I've got the identical triplets here that were in my class. What are your names again?
Chris and Joe.
Joe, identical triplets. Like, how often do you, before coming to the movie last night, thank the two of you. You're a tenured, retired, tell me, sociology. Thank you for, I didn't scare you away yesterday. Who else is here that I can thank? Mark Conway, I wouldn't be here without you. I love you. So why don't we just begin by closing our eyes, and I will lead us in a little prayer. And then I'll read some poems, and then I can take some questions. And I promise it won't go more than 40 minutes. Maybe somebody can give me a signal. I'm pretty good with the time. Okay, so I just love this place, Minnesota. You know, I grew up here, and I live so far away, and so many emotions come back to me when I'm here. There's really no other place quite like it for me. So I'm going to say this word, which is shalom, which in Hebrew, does anybody know what that means? It means peace. Can't have enough of that. And I'll say the word, and then you can say it back to me, and we'll do that for a while and sort of call ourselves together, gather ourselves together as we're here, and listen to a few poems. Shalom. Very good. It's a good ground. Shalom. Shalom. could you start the reading of one of your poems from your book? Mark just published a book, and I would really love him to read one of these poems. You're going to ACB tomorrow, right? Come on up. And then I'll join you.
I was just talking to Rachel Mellis, who I think is, speaking of broadsides, Rachel has been hired to do a broadside for another event that I'm in. And so she mentioned this poem, so I'll read this short poem. Yeah. In the light, but still down the plain back road, your unlived lives hive and clog the trailing mind. To see as if the light went right through you. To hear as if words went through you. To see the dream. To see it's not a dream of what's to come, but what came. Your exhausted breath is sucked up by the pines. You go on breathing as if you didn't know you were breathing, walking the road as if you had no idea what it's like not to be alive.
Other glasses. Okay. This is the first book I wrote. I was talking to the kids today. I think I was with the triplets. I was talking about they were asking me questions about my life. And my first book of poems was published when I was 41. I had been working on it for 15 years. It had been, you can't hear it?
A little higher.
Maybe I need to position. If I get behind that podium, it's going to be all so stiff.
That's better.
Yeah. It helped me. Is that better? No. Fun. I can't go behind the podium, but it'll be. Is that better? All right. So, thank you for that and your hospitality, all the letters you sent from Madrid, and just thank you so much for having me here, bringing me back home. I was talking to the triplets. What were we talking about?
Your history.
Right. So 300 rejections, and then on try number 300, I was 41. I was working at Brooks Brothers, and I got the call that this book had won, and Louise Glick was the judge. And so I'll read one or two from here that are about Minnesota. It seems like I should read things about this beautiful place, where you all live, where I once did. And then I'll read one or two from the second book. Maybe I'll read just some little thing from this memoir I've been working on for 16 years. I thought the rejections would stop, but they only continue. And that is with an agent and has been passed over 17 times. And I have 13 more tries with that. And it's autobiography. Okay, so Mark's poem is about light. So then, this is about a little farmhouse where I lived. Maybe you know these little farmhouses built in the 1800s. I just love this place. I loved it more than a person. Then, I was a full-time house sitter. I had no title. I lived in a farmhouse on a small hill surrounded by 100 acres. All was still. The fields were in a government program that paid farmers to abandon them. Perfect. I overlooked Union Lake, a small lake with a small, ugly island in the middle, a sort of mistake, a cluster of dead elms encircled by marsh resembling a smear of oil paint left to congeal on a pallet. Pesticides farmers sprayed on their crops over the years had drained into the lake and made the water black, the fish shake. About the family that built the house, I knew nothing. Built in 1865, perhaps they came after the Civil War. It was a simple house, 2 stories, 6 rooms, every wall crooked. Before the house, Indians camped there. If you listened, you could hear them. On Sunday afternoons in early June, the sun would burnish the interiors. Shafts of light fell across the rooms. An old gray cat sparred his moat swirls. Up a tiny staircase, ladder steep, I was often found, adrift, half asleep. I forgot words, where I lived, my dreams, mirrors around the house, those streams ran out of gossip. The walls absorbed me. There was every indication I was safe there. Outside, children sang, sweetening the air. Row, row, row your boat gently down the stream. Merrily, 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 life is but a dream. Their fingers marrying each other with ease as the dark built its scaffolding above the trees. Peonies spoiled, dye ran from their centers. Often the lawn was covered by a fine, soft rain. Days disappeared as quickly as they came. The children receded. The moon rose. Cows paused on the wild green plain of all that land still left uncommercialized. 3 years I had there, alone, at peace. Often I awoke as the light began to cease. The house breathed and shook like a lover as I took for myself time needed to recover. So here's another one. Autumn Song, that season that was just before this one, that we know so well. Nobody does the seasons like Minnesota. Autumn Song, the muscular sky of Minnesota is more than I can fathom, full of salmon-colored promises of just how expansive love can be. At a time like this, with a growing slow hunger of fall hushes and sounds in the footsteps of squirrels whirling like dervishes, and in the slopping slough sound of mad cows crazy in love. The human being naked in love is lovelier in the autumn dusk than on a summer's day. Most blowhards lead you to believe romance hangs itself most astoundingly in the summertime. But I am here to say fall is lovelier still for falling in love, for a love that stills the heart, that rustles our dust with good news. When the maple sweats and saps at the corners of his mouth, and when the oak shakes his leaves like 1,000 horseshoes, is the time my heart bangs with barn joy, and I breathe in the subtle approbation of death coming as I recognize the Byzantine look of trees emptying themselves of themselves. The leaves fall like leaflets in a relentless war, and the architecture of skeletons becomes more and more apparent, and the water wavers, the water cracks, and everywhere this upturned look, the look of one last kiss. And on such a night as this, I feel dignity, I feel survival, in the new descent of the earth, shedding its sweat, its passion, my breath, my shimmering cargo is eager to dawn and break free from its hold. Gosh, I wrote one more from here about Minnesota. Minnesota. So in my life, the kids were asking me about my life today. I drew this long diagram because I'm 55. I had to start at one end of the blackboard and go all the way to the other. It's kind of fun. There came the time when I had to leave this place that I loved, but it was time for me to go. And so there's a few poems here about that. I'll give you a bit of I'll read a few of these. I haven't read these in so long. I'll read you, yeah, that's what I'll do. So this is when I first was in Minneapolis, I was little. We were on Franklin Avenue. My parents, it was the time of the Kennedys, Martin Luther King Jr., my babysitters wore bell-bottoms, the Vietnam War was on, the Ed Sullivan Show was on, and some of these are early memories of Minnesota. And I'll read you this one. Blue. A November snow falls, blanking out the window wells. We sit in a basement apartment deep in dark Minneapolis. The president has just been shot. His wife exits, blood on her skirt. The nation is vast. It obscures much. My father wears a blue thin tie and sports a crew cut. My mother is crying again. Why does she cry so much? I am small but not afraid. A war begins, but it is a mistake. I know this. I know this because I am a mistake. I had a hard time. I don't know if you've had a hard time in your life. And it was so difficult that they had to take me away to one of those places called a nut house. So I never thought I would ever say that in front of a group of people that I don't even know. But I don't feel so much shame about it now. But at the time, it just was like the worst thing that had ever happened to me. And there I met a woman, a nurse, and her, then later her husband, and I lived with them for a while before I went to work at Brooks Brothers. And they bought 3 burial plots in Valley Grove, which is south of Northfield, and I will be buried there one day. And so this is about that woman and meeting her there in the hospital. To Martha, my nurse. I leave the open unit, this was at United Hospital, St. Paul, I don't know if it's still there. To Martha, my nurse. I leave the open unit and I am not afraid. I rent a room with a few flies. There is no sea for me to see, only these wheat fields beat by the sun. I had hoped for the sea. No. The sun shines on the gray cat who purrs on the steamer trunk. You have sent me on my way. The hospital floats in the city like a yacht. This new room is bright yellow. I nail a crucifix upon one wall. The crucifix is from Latin America. See, this is foreshadowing everything that's going to come. The crucifix is from Latin America. A white Christ embraced by orange. The Christ says, "Believe in me." It is nearly 2 in the afternoon. There is much to do, much to see. Read you just one more from this book. Some lady, who was you? You introduced yourself. Yeah, that was so kind of you to say. So that got me thinking I should read some of these. So there's one more in here. It's very short. I'm going to put this down. Here it is. So, this one. Okay, I'll end with this one. So I'm leaving Minnesota, and then I moved on to Florida. Afton. The day I leave Minnesota, I am not afraid. After all the years and ghosts, I am done. You can be done with a place. I am visiting a friend's house in the country. It is late fall, almost winter, my favorite time. Dried white hydrangeas are on the windowsill. Winds shove the house and whisper of failure. The hydrangeas shift in their pitcher like wigs. Children pom-pom pull away on a faraway lawn, lost in their melancholy echolalia. The oak grove in the distance grows porous and orange, then ochre, then charcoal, acquiring the dark like a sponge. Such is life in the provinces. A drone storms me aimless in his masculinity. In the mirror, I register what hair I've lost. In my right hand, I hold a key. My legacy is to leave the room empty. Okay. Then, took 11 years, and I wrote another book. Where's that one? Over here. So, I'll read you one or two from there. I guess the broadside thing is from there. And that poem takes place in Minneapolis. It's about Holocaust survivor. I grew up with a lot of people that went through the war. But I read that one earlier. I read that in your class, right? Yeah. So we'll read something else. I'll veer from the course, El Camino. A lot of these poems I wrote, I wanted to make a book that was different. That first book had such a distinct sound, and it took a while to make a new sound. And so I will read you one from here. How are we doing with the time? We are good. So read one from here. Just give me some kind of signal when I need to shut up and sit down. This poem is for our friend, Mark Conway, and myself. Many people know this poet named Marie Howe. Do you know Marie Howe? She's been here, right? Mm-hmm. So I just feel so fortunate to know this woman, and she's sort of like a cross between a movie star. I mean, she's got this hair, this like the most incredible hair in New York, and a liberal Catholic Irish priest, and yeah, it's all wrapped up into this amazing woman. So when I was writing this book, I would often go and visit her, and I would read her the poems. She's very exacting. She's like, get rid of that doesn't work, add this. So I told her about this day I had in New York, and I'll read it now because we're coming up to Holy Week is coming, right? You're all, yeah. So, so what comes in Holy Week is this reading. And I was visiting Marie. I was working at this church in New York, and I had this crazy New York City day. You know, one of these days in New York where like you suddenly see all these people from like your kindergarten class, and just weird people all day long. And I had this whole long day, and at the end of the day, I called Marie on the phone, and I was like, you are not going to believe this day that I had. And she listened, and she said, okay, Go home, write it, just like it happened, just like you told me. Go home and write that poem. So, like Mark and I know, when Marie tells you to do something, you do it, right? Is that a yes? I can't see, I've got my reading glasses on.
Of course.
Of course. This is also about a botched flirtation. Has anybody had one of those? So it doesn't show me in my best light, but I thought, oh, I want to write about that, a botched flirtation. Who writes about that? There was this young guy in some area, and I thought, oh, I think he like has the hots for me. It wasn't true. Embarrassing. Maybe he did a little bit. But the poem is called Hymn, H-Y-M-M. And I was at this high Anglican church, which means when I was doing the gospel, we had to chant it. So there's chanting in this poem. And then I'll read this. And then I'll find one more thing to read, and then you can ask questions. Does that sound good? Yeah. Hymn. And after the day was over, I told my friend Marie this story. He was a young man, and it was finally April. A piano player played in Washington Square Park. The young man walked along with the older man. Changing to the third person so I could tell this embarrassing story. Okay, he was a young man, it was finally April. A piano player played in Washington Square Park. The young man walked along with the older man. Daffodil buds unbuckled their gold in the prosperous dirt beds. Oh, Marie, how I like that line. She said, oh, that's good. Keep that. Daffodil buds unbuckled their gold in the prosperous dirt beds wherever the two men looked. Green applause stirred in the trees. A woman on the street called out to the older man, "Beautiful man, you, beautiful man." The two knew each other, and this coincidence made a bright light. She spent her days raising doves and squirrels. How did she support herself? She observed the two together and respected the fragility of the moment as the angel does in Fra Angelico's Annunciation. The young man came to visit the city. He said he had written in his diary about the older man, had thought about him since they had lunch the week before, a lunch the young man suggested. He gave the older man a CD, all love songs. The older man had been alone long enough to be reflective. In the Anglo-Catholic churches that Sunday, deacons would chant the story of Lazarus from the Gospel of John. Those who believe in me will live even though they die. The young man said to the older man, "When did you come out?" They walked through the park with deliberation. The older man said, "I could kiss you." Somewhere, doves settled on the ledges of the woman's shoulders. Silence surrounded the men as they went back to a brownstone and lay on a high four-poster bed. Before them, a painting of a Roman city, intricate as a symphony that could have contained them. Light grew long in the window and across the painting's canvas. The older man said, "Do you feel like you could kiss me?" The young man responded, speaking in a voice that lacked drama, a voice both kind and bright, and said, "Not now." The deacons practiced their chanting. Those who live and believe in me will never die. Time pressed on the older man. His passion collapsed. Things would go unexplored. The two men felt the folly of the moment. The young man lingered with nonchalance, a cruelty that belongs to youth. Deacons took out their pencils and underlined certain words. Mary arrived where Jesus was, and as soon as she saw him, she fell at his feet. "Lord," she said, "if you had been here, my brother would not have died." dinner, a Chinese restaurant on 6th Avenue, one they had not planned on. Another friend of the older man joined them, a woman who was writing a play with many characters. She promised to take the young man to Grand Central, for the young man had never been to the city before. Suddenly, before they ordered their meal, through the phosphorescent window, now expanding like a poem, filling with a throng earnest to go home, 2 more men appeared, both middle-aged, whom the older man knew. Was it possible he had not seen them in 20 years? They came to the glass like fish in an aquarium. What were their names? Into the restaurant and poem they came. One had been married to a woman and had had a child, and he did remember the child's name. In the sacristies, deacons continued their chanting, going down a third on the 4th syllable from the end of every sentence. He cried with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." The table was full now. Joy grew in the dark as it had in Jerusalem 2,000 years ago. Silverware glinted. People opened the caves of their mouths, laughed so their gold and silver fillings shone, raised their arms like circuit breakers, everyone connected by the pleasures of the ordinary life. Oh, the voltage of wants and needs contained in that city. Everyone spoke over each other, told jokes. The waitress recorded everyone's order, distracted. Marie liked that part. The waitress recorded everyone's order, distracted. The 2 new men announced they were married. Proudly they showed their rings. Then it was time for the young man to depart. The doves must have been sleeping by then. Everyone stood. The dark street shone with light, electricity and stars, fire, bolts, shards, beams, shafts, glints, shimmers, matches, cigarettes, sparks. The deacons were lousy with gospels, leaving them open all over the city. We were free, I said to Marie, and I was happy. It didn't matter about the young man. There was no more time to hate ourselves. Many had already died, and some had been kept from dying. We spoke of her brother John, and we spoke of my cousin John, now both long gone. It was our time now. Over the phone, I could hear her daughter, Inan, asking for dinner in the background, the daughter that had come to her late in life, a gift. The Gospel of John was right. The world holds so much life. There are not enough books to record it all. I kissed the young man on his cheek, very lightly. Jesus said to them, "Unbind him and let him go." We each went our separate ways, following where we were being led. Marie said, "Write it down, just as it happened."
Okay, you know what? If I brought it, I'll read you just 1 or 2 new poems and then that'll be it.
Okay, I did. Okay, so I signed a book contract in New York because I read the memoir earlier today with the triplets. Yeah, so if you want to ask me about the memoir, just talk to the triplets. I'm working on new poems, and they've got marks all over them, so be forgiving. I'll find one and I'll read it to you. And something not. These are more lyrical. They're about my life in Madrid. It's about being a priest. I'm going to read you this one. It's a little longer, but not too long. It's in trimeter, which I never did. Do you know what that is? Do you want to know what it is? Yeah. So it's like 3 beats every line. It's just more or less that. So this is about the life of a priest and somebody that came into my life. And this is called 1 Timothy. You can give me criticisms on this one too, because I'm not sure it's quite done, and some things I'm going to have to guess what I said, but not too much. 1 Timothy chapter 1, verse 5. Does anybody know what happens there? So it's kind of interesting, because one thing I'm really concerned with as I'm getting older is things that are disappearing, like you quoted in that poem. And so one thing, as you know, if you're older, is that letters have completely disappeared from our world. And there used to be this way that we communicated and said things, and we said them in a different way, and we said things slower, and it was different. And there was a tone that was different that isn't there anymore. And so in many of these poems, I'm trying to sort of recapture that tone. First, so the letters to Timothy were Paul writing these letters to a young man. And in 1 Timothy 1:5 is the only time the word grandmother comes up in the Bible, ever. Isn't that weird? I don't have any answers, but it only comes up once. This is about being with an older man in the cathedral that we had to take care of. That's all it's about. It's not hard to figure out. 1 Timothy chapter 1, verse 5 is the title. Did I say Peter is with us, late 70s and reticent? He'd been in the pews for years. Timidly he sang in the choir, muttered more than carried a note. He served on no committee, never put cash in the offering. He began to say strange things like, all of you just fuck off. He'd been married twice and was now alone. The exits or family back in Harrogate I could never seem to reach. And there were no children. I left messages, sent emails around the time he lost his wallet. Gradually he lived with us in a leaky room without heat, his things in one suitcase. From his cot he strummed some melancholy flamenco on a guitar with broken strings. Then all the music stopped. We fed him, tucked him in, his Anglo-Saxon head with a nose like a sharp beak, where mucus often dangled, stood out in homogeneous Spain. In our Anglican church, where no one spoke English, he was the one authentic Anglican thing we had. Now that I think about it, he talked about the war, what he'd done for old Blighty. We began to cut his nails. The toes were done in a shop, and remind him of his pills. He had a full head of hair we frequently had to cut, which astonished our staff and sometimes made us laugh. The rest of us had little left. We tried to find him a spot in one of those sad houses full of bleach and card games. At times he was a nuisance, asking a question 20 times. Spain being Spain, it went slow. His hair grew in curlicues. He became my ad hoc charge. In the peluqueria, do you know that word? Hairdresser in Spanish. In the peluqueria near us, the peluquero, that's the peluquero is in the peluqueria. It's the, Spanish all the words are connected, so the peluquero cuts your hair. In the peluqueria near us, the peluquero leaned over with razors. Peter was the sea, and the man shaving him was like the moon, laying down clean joy upon its surface. The men tended one another, and as his cheeks were fingered, Peter spoke perfect Spanish. He'd left England long ago, had been in the Navy, I think, and taught kids English. Nothing significant, he said. So our life went in La Lasagna. I waited, and I babysat, surveying the tight streets, gypsies, Here's what I've written in my hand. Gypsies, pickpocketers, muscular gay hunks, and tourists with selfie sticks. I went off to Austin, Texas for an enormous church thing. Priests slurping Starbucks, who got which call where. I got quizzical put-downs about working in Spain. Was it true I had no pension? I stood with collar and name tag in the grim convention center on an ugly, hard, busy rug. Something like this. My feet and knees throbbed. I manned a booth with trinkets and talked about an orphanage. I shouted in that distant republic where people crisscross states and forget about Honduras. I don't regret my choice. My queer work with God. How close to me I keep that pretty boy nailed to a tree, screwed tight into worship. One of the volunteers in Tegucigalpa, a Jesuit disaffected by Catholics on his day off, got hit by a truck that broke his neck. He's paralyzed now and jerks a tongue stick with his lips in a cubicle where he works. I dropped that from my pitch. When I returned to our C, our impossibly small C is the place where the cathedral is, S-E-E, Peter had grown much worse. He'd leave the front door open and he kept losing his key. He forgot the toilet frequently. I helped him to disrobe. It's odd about the sexes, the modesty of an old man. He somehow trusted my touch. We were like the army, uniforms, hierarchy, rules, places the public doesn't see. Then Peter fell down the stairs in the metro and was removed, put in hospital restraints. Then there was some talk. Send him back to the Queen, the British bishop said. His Spanish is starting to go. Best he be now with his own. But were those then, now, his own? Who is it we call our own? After all this time passed, how permanent the bind to where we are subjects. How unfree we become when the mind betrays us. I'm older, less important, and I've lived long enough to have nuance thrust upon me. Relate to that. I'll say it again. I'm older, less important, and I've grown and I've lived long enough to have nuance thrust upon me. I don't know what's next. My grandmother knew that. She smoked, put on lipstick, and spit on my cowlick before we went off to church. She rarely talked of God. My family wasn't religious. Her silence was impressive. A little immigrant woman praying in her dead tongue. At times she would sulk. I was young, and I forgot her. No, that's not right. I disregarded her. I regret that. She must have felt separate, alone, cowed, and yet known, like some kind of afterthought. But that's what faith is, isn't it? The thing that happens after thought, and what happens after that. Tomas, Tomas, the time has now come for me too to leave. Let's not linger on that too long. Back to the States, where they say, I belong. Tomas, 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 I hope to see you soon, meet your wife, your son. Keep faith. Cuídate, y hasta pronto. Abrazos fuertes desde Madrid. I can't look in Peter's empty room. Not now. Not right now. His unwashed stink hangs in the halls, and it's almost unbearable. Could do a little dance. thoughts, concerns. Yeah.
So you have an astonishing capability to observe the ordinary and to remind us that the ordinary is more elevated than we tend to think day in and day out. Do you have a word or a description for how you describe that particular quality of attentiveness, of awareness, of observation? That leads you to write the poems? I mean,
I don't know. It's just what I just see around me, and I think I'm often drawn. It occurred to me after the last 48 hours here. I've only been here 48 hours. I think I still have jet lag, but I'm going strong on coffee. Then I'm drawn to what gets ignored. I don't know why. But it seems to be like it comes up again. And that last poem I read about Peter, and so yeah. Art is a chance to just hold. There's a great quote I used from Isaac Denison. What a hell of a writer. And she said, the real difference between God and human beings, he thought, this is from her short story called The Monkey, was that God cannot stand continuance. No sooner has he created a season of a year or a time of the day than he wishes for something quite different and sweeps it all away. No sooner was one a young man and happy at that, than the nature of things would rush one into marriage, martyrdom, or old age. And human beings cleave to the existing state of things. All their lives they are striving to hold the moment fast and are up against a force majeure. Their art itself is nothing but the attempt to catch by all means the one particular moment, one mood, one light, the momentary beauty of one woman or one flower, and make it everlasting. It is all wrong, he thought, to imagine paradise as a never-changing state of bliss. It will probably, on the contrary, turn out to be, in the true spirit of God, an incessant up and down, a whirlpool of change. Isn't that cool? So, writing a poem is just to sort of try to save a little something. You must have. Do you have a question? You do? Oh, no, you don't. No pressure. She's saying to herself, "I will never sit in the front row ever again."
We called me in class today. I was with the triplets, and I never got a chance to ask you a question.
Okay. We'll see how that works.
You write a lot about difficult topics that seem to happen to you throughout your life. Do you find it difficult or relieving to write about those topics?
I think it must be some things take a long time to write about. I think I was talking about that today. The prose book that I've been working on for 16 years. One of the through lines of that is my cousin was murdered. And that happened almost 35 years ago. But it's just taken a long time to write about it. I feel relief having written about it. I think I needed to be in Madrid to write about it. I think there is some kind of release. I think I had so much shame too, and somehow the writing has helped me to release it, so that I don't have to walk around feeling like that. Somehow I was working that out in writing too. So I really don't know what I'm doing when I'm writing, but then I think that's happened. It's usually the thing that you don't want to talk about that you need to talk about, right? I think, right, Mark? Yeah. There's writers all around here. Yeah.
Keep me with that.
One more question. Yeah.
Talk a little bit about the idea of writing about things that are difficult to talk about the impulse to write poetry versus the impulse to write memoir.
Yeah.
What?
you have a sense of why you're choosing one in a particular one?
Yeah. So writing the memoir was, which I never wanted to call it, but that's what it is. I was talking to my sponsor in a 12-step program, and she's like, "It's a memoir. Just get over it. Call it a memoir." all right. So she's a real estate agent. It's amazing the wonderful people that come into your lives. It was a very different kind of writing. The writing of a prose, I had to sort of teach myself, the way I taught myself poetry, and then teach a workshop in Port Townsend on writing memoir. Believe it or not, it filled up. We had no space, and they're coming to listen to me. I'm like, oh boy. But there's some things I can pass on that I've learned. I don't think I'll write anything like that ever again. I think I felt there was something about my cousin's murder that was so nonsensical or something. I didn't want to put it in an elliptical poem. I wanted to really explore it in prose. People were always asking me, why did I become a priest in midlife when I could have gone to a college and gotten a job like you have? Why did I do that? And I never really had an answer, so the prose seemed to be some kind of way to try to answer that. It was different to write, and it's kind of written like a poet would probably write. There's 109 really short sections, and so they're like devotions. It's sort of like I went to look at a book of hours in your amazing library, and so that was sort of my what I was thinking as a structure. Richard Blanco, a friend of mine, wrote a memoir, and I said, well, what were you thinking of? And he was like, TV sitcoms, duh, that's how I set up the scene. I was like, God, I never thought of that. So, does that answer your questions? Yeah. One more question, and then come on, how much time do we have? You're a good timekeeper. We have a question for two? Okay, you and you.
How much revising do you do? Like the poem that you read that's new,
Yeah.
how new is it and what might it go through?
I revise a lot. That first book took 15 years, and the second book took 11. And I've been working on this about 5 years, and I said to Jonathan, the guy I work with in New York, I'm just gonna need maybe another 4 years or so. Like I read that poem, thank you for listening to it, that new poem, and maybe I hear it read and I think, well, maybe this could go, or maybe Mark Conway later will tell me what can go, or so I need time with it. And then when I give it to him, I don't ever want to look at it again. So they usually take me. An inspiration for that poem came really quick. You know where it came from? I was talking to my mom, she's 87 years old, I was telling her about Peter, and my 87-year-old mom said, well, we write a poem about Peter. I want you to write a poem about Peter. So that's what started it. And then I read part of it to her with the all of you just fuck off, and she said, I don't want you to say that. You shouldn't be saying that. So, yeah.
Did it start with Trinidad?
No, but I wanted to, this book is much more, my first book was like, I studied all these forms, I broke them all apart. And then in the second book, I tried to push, like how far could you push a poem into prose and it would still be a poem? I wrote prose poems, and now something was just calling me to go back to the lyric. So all these poems in this third book are they're real, much tighter, and they're all like, not exactly a strict form, but they're pretty close in a lot of ways. There's a lot of rhyme and stuff, but it's funnier than, or lighter maybe than that first book, maybe. Yeah, I don't know, but yeah, yes.
I showed and read your prose poem, Margaret, to my students yesterday.
Yeah.
And my interest was the point, about 3/4 of the point through the poem, the voice pauses and says something like, time rearranges things.
Yeah.
And I've gotten the details.
Yeah, that's right. I know
But
that.
their interest was, their question was, how true is this? Do did this really happen? And I wanted to say, don't fret about that, it's not important, but I didn't. Should I?
No shoulds or have-tos in my world. Well, I think that book is asking a question, and then later when I've been working on this memoir, which is dealing with memories of my parents, something my mother would probably rather not have me write about. It's just my version, and memory is probably the most unreliable narrator around. So it's what I remember, but maybe it didn't. Haven't you had that experience with your brothers and sisters, and you get together with I have a brother in New York, and we'll recall some certain event, and I'll say, and then Mom said this, and then we went on the Ferris wheel, and then we went to Kansas, and I was like, no, we didn't. We were in Wisconsin, and we were with the cows, and I said this, and it's like totally different. So, and they're both true, right? I mean, that's the story of the Bible, right? I mean, you have all this. Did it happen this way? Did it happen this way? Did it happen this way? And it's this beautiful mosaic of what probably happened. So I'm done. Thank you so much.